Pleasant morning to everyone. We are the Group 4, and today we will be reporting about behaviorism of Ivan Pavlov, Edward Thorndike, John Watson, and B.F. Skinner. So today's reporters are Angel A. Canelasa, Riza May E. Famador, and Maricel Lumusad, who is unfortunately unresponsive. But even so, I encourage everyone to please listen, and if it's possible, please take notes. So before we start discussing the individual theories, let us first know what is the general overview of behaviorism. So in a given module, behaviorism is defined as a pedagogical theory that defines learning as a process of knowledge acquisition that takes place through observation, for example, based on objectively quantifiable events rather than introspective psychology. It confirms that learning is strengthened through repeated action, and therefore having a systematic routine where knowledge is revisited repeatedly will undoubtedly reinforce learning. Feedback in behaviorism is a very important component. So behaviorism, also known as behavioral psychology, is a theory of learning which states all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment through a process called conditioning. Thus, behaviorism is simply a response, or our behavior is simply a response to our environmental stimuli. So, unsa ang ato ang mga batasan, unsa ato ang mga actions, ato ang panghunahuna is a result of the stimuli in our society. So the behavioral movement began in 1913 when John Watson wrote an article entitled Psychology as a Behaviorist Views It, which set but a number of underlying assumptions regarding methodology and behavioral analysis. The following names are the key individuals associated with the behaviorism theory. One is Ivan Pavlov, who created the classical conditioning theory. The second one is Edward Thorndike, who created the law and effect and operant conditioning, while the third one is John B. Watson, who worked with the classical conditioning theory, and the last is B.F. Skinner, who developed the operant conditioning theory. So I encourage everyone to please jot down your notes because these individuals would be our topic this afternoon. The overall key terms for behaviorism are the following. First, classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a technique used in behavioral training in which a naturally occurring stimulus is paired with a response. Operant conditioning is a method of learning that occurs through reinforcement and punishments for behavior, while reinforcement means or is used in operant conditioning to refer to anything that increases the likelihood that a response will occur, while punishment is used in operant conditioning to refer to any change that occurs after a behavior that reduces the likelihood that behavior will occur again in the future. So do not worry, guys. These key terms will be further discussed and elaborated in the following reports.
What is behaviorism? Behaviorism is a systematic approach to understanding the behavior of humans and other animals. So this is the theory that human and animals' behavior can be explained in terms of conditioning without appeal to thoughts and feelings. Ivan Pavlov's theory of behaviorism. Ivan Pavlov is a Russian physiologist, but became a major influence in psychology, especially in the theory of behaviorism. Pavlov was the first to introduce the concept of conditioning through his experiments with animals. His conclusions directly influenced John B. Watson and provided him with the original scientific basis for his beliefs. Pavlov also discovered the concept of classical conditioning while studying the digestion in dogs. By doing that, he noticed how the dogs began to salivate as soon as one of his assistants entered the room. Pavlov and his assistants measured the saliva that was produced as a result. He noted that salivation was the process that occurs automatically under stimulus, not under consciousness. Meaning, dogs don't learn to salivate whenever they see food, an unconditioned reflex. After making that scientific discovery, Pavlov dedicated himself to study that type of learning. In an experiment, Pavlov used a bell as a neutral stimulus. and food as the unconditioned stimulus. Every time he fed the dogs, he rang the bell. The dogs learned to associate the bell ringing to get fed, leading them to believe every time the bell rings, they will get fed. After doing the same procedure continuously when he rang the bell, with no food present, the dog still salivated. And through his experiment, we can identify the four factors of classical conditioning, and these are: first, unconditioned response, where the dog salivates upon seeing or smelling the food. Example, salivating in response to a sour taste. Second, the unconditioned stimulus was the sight or smell of the food. Example, the smell of a favorite food which immediately your dog feel hungry. Third, the conditioned stimulus was the ringing of bell which has no connection to food. Example, the dog in his experiments would salivate in response to food, but after repeatedly pairing the presentation of food with sound of a bell, the dogs would begin to salivate to the sound alone. And last, the conditioned response was the salivation of the dogs when ringing of the bell even when no food has present. Example, remove the food and when ringing the bell, the dog would salivate.
That's all for the report of Miss Famador. Now, let us prepare for the next report, which would be reported by me, and we will be tackling about law and effect and operant conditioning of Edward Thorndike. So, who is Edward Thorndike? What is his contribution? What is his significance? And why are we talking about him? So, Edward Lee Thorndike was born in August 31, 1874, and died in August 9, 1949. He is an American psychologist who spent nearly his entire career at Teachers College, Columbia University. He worked on comparative psychology and the learning process led to the theory of connectionism and helped lay the scientific foundation for educational psychology. He is ranked as the ninth most cited psychologist of the 20th century. He had a powerful impact on reinforcement theory and behaviorism analysis, providing the basic framework for empirical laws in behavioral psychology with his law of effect. It is known within his peers that Edward Thorndike is famous in psychology for his work on learning theory that led to the development of operant conditioning with behaviorism, whereas classical conditioning depends on developing associations between events. Operant conditioning, meanwhile, involves learning from the consequences of behavior. Thorndike studied learning in animals, usually cats. He devised a classic experiment in which he used a puzzle box to empirically test the laws of learning. So as you can see in the picture, figure 1, it is a simplified graph of the result of the puzzle box experiments. So here, he placed a cat in the puzzle box. So that's what you see in the figure 1. That's a puzzle box, which was encouraged to escape to reach a scrap of fish placed outside. Thorndike would put a cat into the box and time how long it took to escape. So iyahang suwayan kung unsa kadugay usa makabuhi ang iring kay iya magipreso ang iring. So the cats experimented with different ways to escape the puzzle box and reach the fish. Eventually, they would stumble upon the lever which opened the cage. When it had escaped, it was put in again, and once more the time it took to escape was noted. In successive trials, the cat would learn that pressing the lever would have favorable consequences and they would adopt this behavior, becoming increasingly quick at pressing the lever. This is Thorndike's operant conditioning. Here, with the puzzle box, he put the cat again and again until it becomes an expert in opening the box with the use of the lever, proving everyone that his theory is right, that we learn from the consequences of our behavior. The image is a clear illustration of Thorndike's puzzle box. As we can see, there is a cat inside a box with a lever, and there is a reward, which is the fish. So the cat is placed in the box with the food reward outside. Although learning is not immediate, the hungry cat eventually learns that pressing on the lever will result in getting out of the box and being able to reach the food. Edward Thorndike put forward a law of effect which stated that any behavior that is followed by pleasant consequences is likely to be repeated, and any behavior followed by unpleasant consequences is likely to be stopped. The law of effect principle developed by Edward Thorndike suggested that responses that produce a satisfying effect in a particular situation become more likely to occur again in that situation, and responses that produce a discomforting effect becomes less likely to occur again in that situation. Simply put, when we know that something is not right and that we would get punished by it, then we will not do it again. Since we got two topics in Edward Thorndike's theory, let me first clarify and give you the differentiation of operant conditioning and law of effect. So what is operant conditioning? So operant conditioning is defined or is seen where learning is based on the consequences of responding. Meanwhile, law of effect is defined or seen as responses that lead to desirable effects are repeated. Those that produces undesirable results are not. And that ends my report concerning Edward Thorndike. Now we will be discussing John Watson's classical conditioning. So John Watson's classical conditioning is inspired by Ivan Pavlov's. So who is John Watson? So John Brodus Watson was born on January 9, 1878 in Greenville, South Carolina to Emma and Perkins Watson. He is an American psychologist who codified and publicized behaviorism, which became the primary paradigm in psychology between the 1920s to 1950. He is considered as the father of behaviorism. He published the Little Albert Experiment in 1920 and he died in Connecticut in 1958. Now let us discuss the life of John B. Watson and the start of behaviorism. So John Brodus Watson was married twice and had 2 children in each marriage. He focused most of his study of behaviorism on his children, with whom he did not have good relationship with. He grew up with his father gone most of the time, and he turned to violence and did not do well in school. So we could say that he was kind of a delinquent in his time. But one teacher turned him around, and he ended up attending the University of Chicago, where he studied comparative psychology and he studied animals. He wrote his dissertation about the relationship between behavior in the white rat and the growth of the nervous system. He later became a professor at Johns Hopkins University. In 1913, Watson gave a lecture called Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It. There were many questions about this subject, and it was very unclear to most, until Watson delivered this lecture. He saw psychology as the study of people's action with the ability to predict and control those actions. This idea became known as behaviorism. So what is behaviorism according to John B. Watson? So according to John B. Watson, behaviorism is a learning theory that states that behaviors can be measured, trained, and changed. All behaviors are acquired through conditioning, which occurs through interactions in the environment. So to him, we could understand that our behaviors can be measured, trained, and changed. So naa pa dyan kausaban, pwede pa ta mo grow as an individual, pwede pa ta mo pwede pa nato i-expand natong horizons with the use of conditioning. So according to behaviorism, behavior can be examined in a systematic and observable manner with no consideration of internal mental states. Behaviors can be measured and trained by using punishment and reinforcement. These are ways that people will either decrease a non-desired behavior or increase a desired behavior. According to him, all neonates are exactly the same, ready to be modeled by experience. When born, our mind is tabula rasa, which means a blank slate. Behaviorism primarily is concerned with observable behavior. People have no free will. According to John Watson, we do not have free will. A person's environment determines their behavior. So, where we live, what kind of society or what kind of generation will determine our behavior. So there is little difference between human and animal learning. All behavior, no matter how complex, can be reduced to a simple stimulus, a response. Again, according to John Watson, men are built, not born. Give me the baby and I'll make it climb and use its hand in constructing buildings of stone or wood. I'll make it a thief, a gunman, or a dope fiend. The possibilities of shaping in any direction are almost endless. So to him, according to him, everything is possible with the use of conditioning. So the following images portrays John B. Watson's Little Albert experiment. So first, there is a baby whom we would call neutral response. And then the white rat is the neutral stimulus. So at first, the baby is not scared of the rat. But then, when unconditioned stimulus such as the sound is added, the baby, as you can see in the third picture, is now crying. So the rat is still the neutral stimulus. Because of the unconditioned stimulus created by the sound, the baby is now crying, which results to unconditioned response. Like I said, the baby is not afraid of the rat. The baby is afraid of the sound. But when the sound and the rat were put together, the baby will now cry and associate white rat to the sound, which will make the baby cry even without hearing the sound but when seeing the rat. Because now, the white rat is associated with the sound and the baby is afraid of the sound. So now, whenever the baby sees a white rat, it would associate it with the sound, which it fears. So the Little Albert experiment of John B. Watson was a very controversial experiment during his time, especially when the little Albert, the baby used in that experiment, was a healthy baby boy, but since conducting the experiment, the baby now has trauma or fear inside of him, and then the parents weren't notified, they weren't told that they conducted an experiment on the little boy. So you guys might say it's traumatizing, but behaviorism still happens today, and then it even happens in our classroom. But before we discuss that, let us first know what is behaviorism today. So behaviorism today takes place in regular habits such as in bedtime, consistent approach, reward good behavior, punish or ignore bad behavior, and children grow up like the adults in their environment, and emotional, trivial, or damaging. So how is this theory used in contemporary education? So this theory is used in contemporary education in a form of punishment and reinforcement. Children, especially those who are at risk or have disabilities, are being observed in how they behave. When children are tested on something for behavior, their behaviors are being tested and trained. This theory is commonly applied in the classroom, whether it be for students who need reinforcing or punishing, or for students who are being observed. Teachers and school psychologists are the main proponents, with the children being the subjects. Now, that marks the end of my report concerning John B. Watson. Now, let us proceed to B.F. Skinner's operant learning. So, who is B.F. Skinner? So, he is named Burrhus Frederick Skinner, was born in 1904 and died in 1990. He is considered as the father of operant conditioning, father of behavior modification in the classroom, and is a celebrated psychologist from Pennsylvania. Life of B.F. Skinner. The U.S. psychologist B.F. Skinner was highly influenced by John B. Watson's work and his concept of behaviorism. He was dismissive of the psychoanalytic contributions of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Skinner believed that instead of any psychological explanation for a person's mental state, as well as their beliefs, desires, and memories, all humans and animals and their behaviors were dictated by their environment. Skinner is famous for his work on operant conditioning and the law of effect. He is similar with Edward Thorndike. Although these behavioral and learning concepts were previously created by Edward L. Thorndike, it was B.F. Skinner that gave operant conditioning its name and developed it further. Operant conditioning is a process in which behaviors can be learned from reinforcement and punishment, and the person or animal will make an association between the behavior and its outcome. His works would refine the earlier concepts that were developed by Thorndike, and he would also be influenced by his methodology as well. Like Thorndike, Skinner would perform different studies on animals, especially rats and pigeons, and would become the inventor of the Skinner box. The following are the characteristics of B.F. Skinner's operant learning. So, positive reinforcement is the behavior strengthened by the consequences of experiencing a positive condition. Negative reinforcement is the behavior strengthened by the consequences of stopping of a negative condition. Punishment is defined as behavior weakened by experiencing a negative condition, while extinction is defined as behavior is weakened by the consequences and not experiencing a positive condition or stopping a negative condition. So this is the image of the or illustration of the Skinner box. So Skinner's operant conditioning chamber, also called Skinner box, was designed to teach rats how to push a lever. This behavior is not natural to rats. So operant conditioning with positive and negative reinforcement were performed in order to teach the behavior. But before reading the positive and negative reinforcement, I would like to ask you guys, have you noticed the similarities between Edward L. Thorndike and Skinner's experiment? Both conducted their experiments with the use of animals. The other one uses cats while the other one uses rats, but both inside a box and with levers. Skinner box was that the rat was awarded with food when he pressed the lever. The negative reinforcement is that the rat was able to turn off the electric shocks produced by the floor by pressing the lever. But why is it considered negative? It is considered negative because it involved shocking, electric shocking the rat. That's why it's negative reinforcement. And that's Group 4's report for today. Thank you.